Hi there. Today we are talking about validating one another, whoever the other is, whether it's your spouse, your fiance, parents, child, friend, fellow sports fan, whatever it may be. But in the context of relationships, understanding is a huge thing to each of us. Being understood is so important. It's more important than being agreed with. This is what I've learned in life about myself and others, that people really don't mind even being disagreed with as long as they feel you understand them. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But when I officiate a wedding, I always talk with the bride and groom, months in advance of the wedding when I'm talking with them about what they're getting into with marriage, is try to validate one another, rather than that knee-jerk reflexive reaction when you're in a disagreement or a discussion to prove your own point, to prove that you're right, to prove that your logic is rock solid. I've learned, and I had to divest myself of that approach as well, because especially in college and for a few years after that, I had to be right. And I no longer have to be right. I've learned, for instance, that even when I am right, my opinion generally is of no cosmic significance. It doesn't change the Earth's axis. It doesn't, being right is helpful, but it isn't as important as we make it out to be. Which college should our kid go to, or where should we go on vacation, or whatever. You pick your examples, but even when you're right, it still isn't going to change the world generally in a huge way. So when I kind of realized this, I backed off a little bit and I looked for the keys or the key to having better conversation with people and really getting along with them. And I found that understanding people is the key thing in life, in relationships, or it reduces so much friction. So when I do a wedding, I always share this, even during the ceremony, some of the things that I'll share with you now, but the primary thing is to look to validate where the other's coming from, and I'll get into a little bit more of what that means now. But there are three things to look out for in yourself, and you can spot it in others. Once you see it in yourself, it's pretty easy to see it in others. It's kind of like being an ex-smoker. If you used to smoke and you walk in a room and there's smoke, it's like, oh my God, you notice it everywhere. And it's the same thing with this need to be right. If you yourself had this need to be right, and you're talking with somebody and you see they've just got to defend their position, you spot it in a heartbeat, and it really is counterproductive to healthy relationships. Being right, or being in control, or being comfortable, those three things are key to not validating somebody else's position, not understanding it. Because if you're just constantly trying to prove or look for reasons in your own mind to buffer your own or support or buoy your own position, you're not really trying to understand the other one. And if you're getting married, especially if you're in a marriage, and that's your approach, you're going to have far more disagreements, and the distance between you two will be greater than it should be. Because we really can get closer, and we know that we can agree to disagree on things in life. We all agree to disagree on things in life. But few things produce a sense of loneliness like being misunderstood does, especially being misunderstood by the person you married. Being understood by the person you married and loved in spite of being understood. Well, being understood by the person you've married is also a very wonderful feeling, because you have somebody you can trust in deeper and broader ways. I know it seems sacrilegious to some of my Christian brothers and sisters to say that my opinion isn't as important, or your opinion isn't as important as you make it out to be. You're not going to stop the earth from spinning as quickly as it does. You're not going to stop your social circles from operating pretty much as they do. It's good to have change of opinion. That's fine. But just consider that being right isn't as important as you may think it is in a social setting. Looking to validate another person is a whole different mindset. It produces peace, it'll produce trust, but to be sure and clarify, I am absolutely not saying that you're looking to agree with another. You can find out why if somebody's, say, a Democrat and they want universal health care, and let's say you're a Republican and you don't think that that's right. If you, instead of just argue with that person, but try to understand, well, universal health care, if we could pull it off, it's not such a bad thing. What are your ideas? And you may find that you disagree with the ideas, but at least that person knows you've taken the time to understand them. If you're a Democrat and you hear a Republican speaking, for instance, this is an election year, all the ads are on TV now, so we'll go political right now. But if you hear a Republican say, oh, we need to be financially responsible, we can't keep going into debt, well, that's also valid. So if we back off of not so much our convictions, but the way we're trying to back the other one off of theirs, rather than trying to understand more fully why they think what they think, then either we can have greater peace among one another, and then we can just agree to disagree, if it gets to that. When somebody feels understood, it's a really, really good feeling. I know that when I'm talking with somebody who understands what I'm saying, it's a really good feeling, and we can enjoy that a whole lot more in a marriage, especially. But one way of looking at it is that, like, even biblically, like the Apostle Paul speaks of being members in particular. And what it is to be a member in particular is that it's just another way of saying we're each unique. We each process the world uniquely. And the analogy used in the New Testament is to a body, right? Hand, feet, ears, eyes, all that. And we're very familiar with bodies, our own. And taking that metaphor, that analogy further, a hand will process the world very differently than, say, a foot will. A hand is more refined. A hand, for instance, if it's going to pick an object up, considers whether or not it's sharp, slippery, gritty, cold, hot, various considerations that a hand must consider. It has to know whether it's heavy, whether it's lightweight, whether it's fragile. A foot doesn't care about any of that. All a foot is thinking is, if that hand picks that object up, all that weight is being transferred to me. So it's a much more basic life approach to life that a foot has. Now, metaphorically speaking, if a hand and a foot marry, or are friends, they're naturally going to speak of the world differently, and they're going to have different concerns about things in the world and life, and it will reflect even in the language that they use to describe it. These are things that we can get a little more penetrating insight into if we take the time to understand, where's that person coming from? Why do they speak the way they do? Why do they think the way they do? Why do they feel the way they do? And if you get married, and in this analogy, a hand and a foot marry, you'll be a lot stronger if you understand one another and come to accept the way the other one processes life and speaks of it. And you might even find yourself switching your view of life because you realize they have a perspective that actually works better than your own on whatever you're talking about or whatever the issues may be. Now, in a marriage or in any relationship, communication is vital. And if you're going to gain understanding, you're going to need to communicate. And every so often it might be difficult because they're standing their ground, you're standing your ground. But there's a tool that my friends use when they're at that point when they're at an impasse, but they know they need to resolve an issue. And it's that they have a piece of tile floor on their kitchen countertop. And the first one to get to that piece of tile, has the floor. They're the one that gets to speak. And the other one has to listen. But when they're done speaking, they hand that tile to the person who had to listen, and now that person gets to talk, and you've got to listen. So this will foster listening because, as Yogi Berra said, you can hear a lot just by listening. That's very yogi, by the way. But listening is such a vital thing. Once you get yourself more attuned to listening rather than speaking, you'll see things will change in your relationship. And listening, I can't even overstate how important it is. I mean, you should really only say something if what you've got to say is of greater value than the silence. And that's a high ideal to live up to, but it does stress the importance of listening and even silence. And then the third thing that I'll point out here regarding communication. A Harvard professor does this at the business school. I was listening to a seminar a few years ago. And he'll break his class up into two groups, group A and B. And he'll give each group a real-world problem that a business faced at one point or may currently be facing. And he'll break the class up into groups A and B and say, now go find a solution to this problem. And the professor will send them out to work on a solution. They'll come back together, and they will invariably have a different solution to the problem. He'll put them together, groups A and B, say, come up with one solution. And should it happen, which it does quite often, that each is so wedded to their views that they don't relent or they don't find a common ground to come up with one solution, he'll have group A then argue group B's position, and he'll have group B take up group A's position and argue it. And this is a way of understanding the other one's position. And if we voluntarily do this in our relationships, it will foster much greater understanding among one another. And this is what I mean by validating. I mean really understanding where the other is coming from. There's a great proverb, Proverbs 4:7 says, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with everything you have, get understanding. And most people, I know in fundamentalist Christian circles or even in conservative Jewish sects, S-E-C-T-S, there's this idea that understanding means understand for Jews Torah or the Pentateuch or the writings. And for Christians, the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible, parts of it. Understand that. But understanding is much broader. I mean, there really is little point to knowing the Bible if it doesn't show up in your life, if there's no practical application to it showing up in your life. And if understanding is the principal thing, that absolutely applies to understanding one another in relationships. So, few things maintain connectedness like being understood, for being known for who you are. But even if you and your loved one or your friend or whomever, you're at a stalemate, there's no law, there's no rule that says you've got to cop an attitude toward them or dig in and just get nasty. It's okay to agree to disagree. It really is. I mean, we're very different. The left hand and the right hand, I mean, they do different things. Even though they're both hands, they're not always acting in concert with one another. Sometimes they have to do different things, for instance. So, as an older person might say, when you speak with older people, they give you very short but simple advice. And they would probably just say, when you're in your disagreements, be nice and listen. And this is a key to validating the other one. It isn't agreeing, but it absolutely isn't maintaining that knee-jerk reaction to disagree. So I hope this helps you sort of be aware of one dynamic in relationships that will probably eliminate 95% of the problems in relationships, which is simply look to validate where the other one's coming from. So there you have it. See you on another video.